Have you ever found yourself working under a boss who was a terrible leader? Whether it's constant confusion, lack of support, or even downright toxicity, you are not alone. Bad leadership can feel like an impossible mountain to climb. But today, we're going to equip you with the strategies not to only survive, but to thrive in these challenging environments. In this episode, we'll dive into real world advice and personal stories about how to navigate poor leadership, manage your career growth, and even help turn things around. Stay tuned for insights on surviving a bad boss, strategies for thriving under poor leadership on the Transparent HR podcast. Welcome to the Transparent HR podcast, where we aim to empower individuals with transparent HR insights, fostering career opportunities, and navigating workplace success for all. It's your host, Prince Tate, and I'm super excited that you are listening to the 6th episode of this podcast. Today, I'm only asking for 2 things. I'm asking you to subscribe and to share this podcast with a colleague or coworker. Now, let's dig right into it and introduce our guest. Joining us today is Sean Barnes, a seasoned cross-functional leader with over 2 decades of expertise spanning leadership development, digital strategy, operational excellence, human resources, ESG, and HSE. Sean's unique approach to leadership is all about bridging the gap between developing strong leaders and driving operational excellence. He is the founder of WSS Solutions and the host of the Way of the Wolf podcast, where he shares insights on building effective leadership and thriving organizations. Today, he brings his wealth of expertise to help us navigate the complexities of leadership, especially when it comes to dealing with poor leaders. Welcome to the show, Sean. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, Prince. How about yourself?
Hey, I'm super excited that you're here today and that we have this opportunity to collaborate with each other. Before we get into today's conversation, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you like to do outside of work?
Man, I would probably say fitness and cars, like going to car shows and things like that. I used to be real big into racing, and I still have a fast car, but I guess maybe I've grown out of that or become increasingly risk averse whenever it comes to dangerous activities like that. But fitness and cars are probably my big things outside of work.
Gotcha. Awesome, man. That's amazing. You know, I find myself falling in love with vehicles more and more, just wanting to explore more of them. Now, the fitness thing, I'm working on that. So you're gonna have to help me with that. You're gonna
I
have to
got
help
you
me.
for
Yeah,
sure.
you're gonna have to help me with that. But hey, let's get into our career quote. The quote says, "The key to successful leadership today is influence, not authority," by Ken Blancard. When I think about this quote, I, there's one specific thing or a couple things that I think about that really makes an impact as a leader. It's building trust and relationships with your employees. These days, people, they want leaders who are more like guides and teammates, or someone that they can collaborate with, not just bosses throwing around orders. And a lot of times when I look at those type of leaders, I call them the call center supervisor. Because those, typically, if you've ever worked in this call center environment or you've witnessed, a lot of times supervisors, they're giving orders, they're telling you, hey, you could go and break now, and things like that. But the best leaders are the ones who focus on building real relationships and trust within their teams. When they lead by example, generally care about their people, and actually listen, it creates an environment where employees feel comfortable speaking up, also sharing ideas. Instead of just using their authority to make things happen, leaders who rely on influence they tend to get their teams buy in early, not just because they have to, but they want to get the buy in from their teams. When employees trust their leaders, they feel more valued and respected, which makes them more motivated to do their best. Over time, this kind of trust leads to better teamwork, stronger communication, and more positive vibe, or I like to say, a great culture within the workplace, which ends up boosting morale, productivity, and it's just a win win for everybody. So, when you think about this quote, what are your sentiments about it?
Man, I've had so many undeveloped leaders throughout my career,
Mm,
and there's a few different things that resonated with me as you were kind of talking through that. But leadership is about having the ability to inspire and influence all of those around you. It is not about authority coming in with an iron fist and controlling schedules and making, oh, you can take a break now type of a thing. That's not what leadership is. When you develop skills around being able to inspire and influence those around you, what happens is all of your peers, they're going to naturally start coming to you for guidance, looking up to you as a leader. Even though you're not in a position of authority, the fact that you can influence them and inspire them to do the right things and move the organization in the right direction, that is what makes a leader.
mm. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Look, you are a leadership expert, I like to say. And I think it's important to have you on the show for us to really have this conversation about, how do we really navigate just bad and toxic leadership, right? And so that's what we're talking about today. And because you're an expert, I think you're the best person to have this conversation with. So, we've all had bad leaders, toxic leaders, or even just leaders that they just don't know what they're doing, right? So, can you help us and our listeners that are listening today? How do we really navigate these bad leadership? But the first question is, what are some early signs that indicate a boss might not be an effective leader? And how can employees identify if these issues are temporary? If it's just maybe that leader's going through something in this moment, or if it's just who they are and it's going to be a long-term problem. How do we really identify these things early on?
Well, I don't have any sort of quick tips on how to identify who the bad leaders are. I think it's something that's innate. We all experience it
Mhm. Mhm.
by having interactions with them.
Right.
And anytime you walk into a team or a business, you can quite simply, hey, who's the asshole? And they're going to know exactly who that person is. Now, whenever it comes to undeveloped leaders, this is something that's actually quite unfortunate. Whenever you see how many undeveloped leaders exist in organizations today, and part of me says it's not their fault because not many organizations invest in developing leadership skills. But the other part of me is like, yes, this is your fault. You need to have enough self awareness as a leader to understand what's going on and understand the importance of continuing to develop your leadership skills. But if you are an employee and you have
Right,
a
right.
bad manager or undeveloped leader, you know it, you experience it. And the thing that I've learned is to view it through a lens of, I don't think Prince is a bad guy, he just is undeveloped in terms of leadership skills. And I, as a member of the team, really have a responsibility. If I want to be a leader one day, part of that means leading up the chain of command. And I need to build a relationship with my manager, even if they are an undeveloped leader. I need to build a relationship, establish that trust and rapport and credibility. And then I can start coaching and guiding them to help them become a better leader. But you have to have that trust and that relationship built first, and you have to develop your own leadership skills. And I gotta say, if you learn how to develop leaders
Hmm.
above you, man, you can develop anybody
Mm,
across any of your teams. Like that is a very challenging skill to develop, but
yeah,
once you do, it's like a superpower.
yeah. So, it's like you have that gut feeling um, through your experiences with that leader, and you can really identify, like, you know what, this leader, they don't really know what they're doing. And I like your perspective of this leader may just be undeveloped. I like that because a lot of times we don't really think about that, especially as employees, because when a manager comes, whether they're new to the organization or they've gotten promoted, or maybe they've been there since before I got there, we never really think about, is this leader really developed or not? And I think that a lot of times leaders overcompensate for where they lack, right? If they don't know how to bring two people together, they oftentimes would throw off that situation or that issue on the employee, right? Like, hey, what have you done? I think that's your fault, right? Instead of being a leader to say, you know what, how can I bridge the gap, right? And I think it's important for leaders to understand, like, hey, as a leader, how can I bridge the gap and allow my team to be much more effective and efficient by the team members just being able to work with each other well. I often say in HR, you don't have to like them. You don't have to love them, but you got to know how to work with each other.
That requires you to be able to check your own ego
Mm,
to be able to build that relationship and trust and coach and guide because our default setting, well, this is my manager. Why should I
mhm.
be trying to coach my man? They should be the one developing me. Well,
Right.
this is not really the way the world works, whether they have been with the organization for over a
Mhm,
decade or they were best friends with the CEO and dropped in. The
mhm.
fact remains this is the reality that you are faced with. And being a leader means checking your ego and understanding
Yeah,
I'm still going to do everything that I need to do to make sure my team is successful. And if that means I have to buddy up with this guy who's an undeveloped leader and coach my boss on how to be a better leader, that's what we have to do. Is it fair? No. Is life
yeah,
fair? Also, no. But if
yeah.
you want to be better, these are skills that you need to start developing. You know, I'm actually I'm gonna go ahead and share a little bit of a story. A couple of
Okay.
years ago, I had a guy that I reported to. Admittedly, I wanted the position that he was dropped into the
Mm,
organization
okay.
to fill, and I had the opportunity to interview him before he came into the business, and whenever I shared my perspective with senior leadership, yeah, super nice guy. I just don't think he's quite ready to operate at this level. Now, it was an interesting dynamic because very few employees get an opportunity to interview their manager or potential manager coming in. And, I struggled with it because I wanted that role at the time. He came in very undeveloped, very ineffective. He had some deep connections with some of the senior leaders, which is presumably why he ended up in the
Yeah,
role to begin
that's how it
with.
happens. Yeah.
Exactly. And the unfortunate reality is, in a 6, 7 month span of time that he was with us, he was eventually exited because, he
Mm,
just wasn't really the right fit for the
right.
organization.
It'll
But
happen.
man, I lost legitimately hundreds of hours of sleep in frustration at his inability to execute.
Wow.
It was one of the most challenging and frustrating times in my leadership journey because I saw the writing on the wall. No, this is not the right guy. Well, he's
Right,
coming
right.
in anyways, and then just watching the destruction that ensued. Now, whenever it came time for our annual review, he and I sat down, and again, this guy in my mind at that point in time was the bane of my existence. Losing all this sleep, beyond frustrated, we sit down for my performance review, which was all of 8 minutes, to be clear. He sits down, and his feedback was, "Hey, you're doing great. We get along really well, and I think you're doing good."
Wow.
That was pretty much the extent of the performance review. And I paused for a moment and thought, well, where can I do better? What are some things that I am doing well? Like, can you give me
Right.
some specifics?
Give me some
And
specifics. Yeah.
again, this spoke to his lack of experience in this type of a role, which in
Yeah.
hindsight, fine, whatever.
It makes sense. Yeah.
But the thing that always stands out as I look back on that season of my leadership journey was this guy that was the bane of my existence thought we were best friends.
Mm,
Now, I understand how that comes across. People are thinking, oh, well, Sean's just playing the political game. Yes, to an extent, but the reasons for that are what's most important. I
mhm.
had to build this relationship with this person because
Right.
he was holding the keys to the kingdom, and I needed things to happen
Right.
for my team, for the business. And he was the gatekeeper. And so for us to keep moving the things forward that we needed to move forward to
You got to
support the
play nice.
business, exactly right. We had to play nice. And it worked out because I
Mm,
built a relationship. He and I worked well enough together. I'd go home at night frustrated beyond belief, but we were
mhm.
able to keep moving things forward. Eventually, he was exited from the organization and they ended up giving me that role at like after it was all said and done,
Mm.
which another story, I wasn't really interested in the role anymore after that.
Right.
But all
Right.
of this, we have to view these challenges in our career as opportunities to learn.
Opportunities. Yeah.
As frustrating as it can be,
Yeah.
every bit of adversity, every challenge that you come
Mhm.
across with an undeveloped leader or a
Right. Right.
toxic boss, view it through a lens of what is this trying to
Yeah.
teach me? What is the
Yeah.
opportunity for
What can I
me
learn? Yeah.
to get better?
Yeah. No, that's totally true. And I've shared with you before, we've all had toxic leaders or just undeveloped leaders, as you stated. And every time I go through that, I always ask myself, what have I learned? Either what to do or what not to do. And I think as employees, because we all get a paycheck at the end of the day by our organization, so we're all employees, regardless if we're leading people as well. How do we make sure that we can take this as an opportunity to grow ourselves? And I think that's what's important. Um, in your experience, can you share with us what may have been some effective ways to navigate that sick leader who doesn't seem to respect or even trust their employees?
That is a good question. I would say that we can overcome that toxicity by being an even better leader ourselves.
Mm,
And again, this is an area where we have to check our ego and acknowledge, okay, this undeveloped leader or
mm,
toxic leader that I have above, not good for the organization and for the team. The entire team is frustrated and struggling with this person. Now, on a long enough time horizon, presumably the people in the business, the senior leadership,
yeah.
they are going to pick up on this. But in the meantime, your role, if you are an aspiring leader, is to learn as much as you can and outshine the darkness.
Yeah.
Be
You've
that
got to.
spotlight and that guide for the rest of the team. People will naturally start to come to you for guidance and leadership. Now, an interesting and unfortunate thing will occur. If you're on a team full of 10 people and all of you report into one manager and people start naturally coming to you, that manager is probably going to start to feel threatened.
Right. Right.
To mitigate that risk, you
Right.
build an even stronger relationship with the manager so that he or she doesn't feel threatened. And you try to redirect people back into, like, hey, let's have a conversation with Jason about it. So you pull
Yeah.
Jason back in. So you're kind of mitigating the risk of them feeling threatened because in situations like that, these bad or toxic managers go into a self preservation mode where
Hmm.
they're going to start blaming anything and everything they can on Sean. You have to outshine that darkness, which is even more challenging. But you know what? If you learn
Hmm.
how to do it, ooh, you are going to be a
Yeah.
strong leader and a formidable force in the leadership realm. And people are
Yeah.
naturally they're going to see what's going on and they're
Yeah.
naturally going to come to you even more.
Yeah. Yeah. I would definitely, because, I've had a toxic leader before, and I struggled because I had never went through it before. Because I have always had great relationships with my leaders. And this one specific leader came in as a new leader within that organization and just start wreaking havoc. I mean, changing things. You don't know the culture. You don't know why we have these processes in place. And I'm a stickler for process improvement. So I'm not going to, fight against you with, hey, we don't need to change this or we don't need to change that. I'm going to be your biggest advocate to say, yes, let's change something. Right. But I think there's a difference between, coming in as a leader and not really caring or respecting about, respecting the employees that have been there versus, you coming in and you just, you just don't want to get to know them, um, for me, some of the things that I did was like I fought against it. We were sending emails back and forth, getting our VP involved. And the thing about it is the VP didn't want anything to do with it. I'm like, you hired this person. So you
Okay,
got to fix it.
I'm going to interject there really quickly
Hmm.
because you just touched on something that is a significant and major issue in
Hmm.
corporate America because you have an undeveloped leader that you and the rest of the team are reporting into. You're trying
Hmm.
to pull in the vice president who also doesn't want to have anything to do with it, but oh, they are the ones that hired the
Right,
undeveloped
right,
leader. So what we see is this very real issue of undeveloped leaders hiring undeveloped leaders. And when this happens, mediocrity reigns supreme. And then all of your high performers, they get frustrated beyond belief and then they leave. And you start to see churn and churn and churn in the organization. And the undeveloped leaders at the very top, I just don't get it. We can't
right,
pay these people enough. Well,
right,
it's not about the money. If you have one manager that their turnover is 80% in a year, like you have it's not that 80% of the employee population is the problem. It's the
right,
manager that was the problem. But if
right.
that manager is good friends with the most senior leader,
Hmm.
it's going to be challenging for them to see what's going on because they are going
Yeah,
to have blinders on it.
that's
That
true.
that bad
That's
manager
true.
is over here telling their buddy, "Oh, well, we just can't find the right talent. We just can't find the right talent." And they're blinded by their proximity to that undeveloped manager.
Hmm.
And the only way that we can overcome this is by raising awareness of what strong leadership is, and then
Mm.
inspiring and influencing other people to be able to go out and be the best leader
Yeah.
that they can be, to be that beacon of hope and light and show people by leading through their actions.
Yeah, yeah. And I think another issue, a lot of times, the reason why they don't want to deal with it is because, if you're a leader hiring another leader, you don't want to accept that notion that, ooh, I hired a bad leader. Sometimes their ego gets in the way, right? And like you said, for your example, you had this leader to come in and a few months later they exited the organization. And likewise, with this same leader that I had, believe it or not, they end up having to terminate this leader. And so, but by that time, I was long gone. But I realized as I start really looking at my faith, am I trusting in God to get me through the situation? Right? Because he won't put anything on you that you can't bear. So, I started looking because I was waking up with anxiety. I didn't know what anxiety was until I had a toxic leader. I didn't want to come to work. And so I had to change my mindset and to say what you talked about earlier. How can you learn from this? How can you look at as this as an opportunity? And so one thing that I did was I went to the leader, um, and it pulled everything within me. I apologize. I apologize for how I reacted um, to her bad leadership. And so once I did that, it was like a relief off of me because at that point, now it's not on me, it's on you to make it right. And so from then I started supporting her, and eventually I got to a point where I had peace in my mind. I had peace in my heart. And I think that's important. You have to find ways to protect your peace, and you have to also be humble. It may take some days where you just don't want to do certain things that leader's asking you to do, but you have to say, you know what, I'd rather have my peace. So let me just kind of let me fold in and try to support this leader the best way I can. Going into like communication styles and even just communication strategies, what would you recommend? Like, how should employees approach a difficult boss, especially when their leader is very defensive and maybe they're not approachable as well? What should that communication be like for that employee and their leader?
One of the biggest things that has helped me become a stronger leader is
Hmm.
learning about different behavioral styles. And I'm sure
Mm,
we've all heard of
yeah,
DISC and Berkman and
yeah,
Enneagram, all of those things. I mean, pick whichever one you like, but
yeah.
start learning more about people's different personality types and how to
Hmm.
interact with them. I spent
Hmm.
the majority of my career as the introverted IT guy, just banging away on a keyboard. And when I started leading human resources about 8 years ago, this was one of the first things that I started to focus on learning. And I focused on DISC behavioral assessments. Just it's very simple and easy to grasp, and it also
Yeah,
scales very well in an
yeah.
organization.
I
But
love the disc.
yeah, DISCs are fantastic. And I think that when I started to have an increased level of self awareness that comes from that behavioral assessment, I started to actually understand, okay, well, this is why I act this way, as opposed to just, oh, Sean is this way. This is why and how I am perceived by others. The other benefit is learning all of those around you and how they it's not just that, "Oh my god, they're outgoing, bubbly, and they stress me out because of their energy." That's who they are, great, but we need to learn how to adapt to communicate with the
Yeah,
D's, with the I's, with the S's.
that's true.
When we learn how to understand them, how to communicate with them, that is one of the biggest steps that I can encourage people to take is go do a DISC assessment,
Yeah.
read through it, and then read through it again,
Hmm.
and then start identifying others in the organization and think, you know what?
Hmm.
I bet Jason is here. I'm thinking Crystal is over here. And then you can actually start tweaking and tailoring your communication style with Jason, with Sally, to better understand, hey, is this working or not? If I am blunt and direct with Jason, not natural to who I am, but he gets it. And then all of a sudden we can move things forward.
Yeah.
If I have to be a little bit more warm-hearted, unicorns and rainbows with Jeff because he's bubbly and outgoing and an I,
Hmm.
that's what I have to do. So
Mm,
leadership is about
yeah,
adapting
that's
and
true.
being a chameleon so that we can interact with everybody in the way that they need to be interacted with. And this goes back to the
Hmm.
conversation of, well, that's not fair. I have to do it. Well, yeah, that's what it takes to
Hmm.
be
That's
better.
true. Yeah, I think that we as employees, we have the responsibility to take action on how we like what part do we play in trying to make sure that this relationship that we have a good relationship. It's not always on the leader. I will say that. It's not always on the leader. You have to take accountability for your actions. What are you doing to make sure that this relationship works great? What are you doing to make sure that the environment is as positive as possible, right? And so after going through all of these things and working on strategies to approach the leader and working on taking accountability for myself, we understand that sometimes leaders, they still don't fold or give in or change their mindset about you. They will always look at you as a problem person or a threat, as you stated. When should an employee decide it's time for me to go to HR? Because now it's become what employees like to say, they're bullying me, they're harassing me, they're, now the environment becomes again toxic. And now it's our responsibility as an organization to improve that environment. So when should employees make it in their mind to say, I've done everything I can do to make this relationship work, but the leadership is not budging?
This is a delicate topic, and
Hmm.
I encourage people to approach it with caution. I'm going to
Hmm.
share my perspective on why
Mm.
and
Yeah.
then go into answering your question.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you think the leader is toxic and
Hmm.
you go to HR, you are immediately raising awareness
Hmm.
of yourself, of this toxic leader, and you're being putting yourself on HR's radar. It is important that you have enough self-awareness and have spent enough time looking in the mirror asking, what am I doing to contribute to this situation? Because if you go to HR and then HR does their investigation and they come to the conclusion that you are the problem situation. So
That's
there's
true.
some steps that I encourage people to take before they
Yeah.
go put themselves on
Yeah.
HR's radar. So that's number one. I think that when the time is right for you to go to HR is when you have done everything that I just talked about and asking yourself, what am
Hmm.
I doing to contribute to this situation? And you are comfortable and have documented, okay, I, Sean, have encountered these types of behaviors from
Hmm.
Jason. He's blunt. He curses at me in meetings. He yells at other members of the team. Have your documentation
Mm.
on specific examples
Yeah.
of what
Specific example.
has occurred because HR is going to need them anyways. If you come to the
Hmm.
conversation prepared,
Right.
everything is going to go a lot smoother. You also need to approach HR in from a place of, I'm really trying to figure this out. I'm really trying to help get things in a better place. Do you have any guidance for me? You
Yeah, that's good.
cannot approach
That's
HR
good.
with a
That's
mindset of, oh, Jason's being a problem. He's
hmm
toxic. Y'all need to fix it.
right, right.
You need to approach them with, here are the things that I've documented. Here are the
Mm.
things that I've tried. Can you help guide me?
Documentation is key, man. It's
Yeah,
key.
documentation
Dates.
is key.
Yep.
Yep. And then whenever you take that approach, you mitigate the risk of HR immediately question, well, is Sean being the problem child or is
That's true.
Jason the problem? Because you're coming in with all of your documentation
Hmm.
and you're approaching the conversation in a way of genuinely trying to help. You are genuinely
Right.
expressing concern and you are trying to lead and figure it out. But we have these challenges over here with Jason that we in the organization have to figure out. The timing of that is really going to be contingent upon when you feel it in your heart that I have done absolutely everything in
Hmm.
my power to make this work.
Yeah.
Only then do I encourage people to go to HR.
Mm.
It is far too easy for us to just say, "Oh, he's toxic. I'm going to toss this over to HR," without actually stepping up and
Yeah.
trying to lead and trying to resolve the problem. But I can assure you, if you go into business and leadership and teams and culture with this mindset of, I'm going to solve all the problems at the lowest level first, you will build a brand and
Mhm.
reputation for yourself
Yeah.
of being a strong leader. And yes, it will take some time. That's just more time in the seat for you to continue to practice and get better. But that is the type of brand and reputation you want in your organization.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, man, when I had that issue, I was in HR. So guess what? I couldn't go to HR because I was HR. And the thing about it, people don't realize as HR professionals, and you've been an HR executive leader, when we have issues too. We're human, right? We deal with the same problems that team members deal with on a day-to-day basis. We see some of the same things. And the bigger the organization is, they may have HR for HR. But if you're working at a smaller organization, they may not have HR for HR. And so you may get to a point to where you don't trust HR. You may get to a point to where there's no one else you can really go to. And at that point, you may start considering leaving the organization. So, Sean, in your opinion, when should an employee start considering leaving the company due to poor leadership and toxicity? And what steps should they take to ensure that they leave in the best terms as possible?
Oh, man. Story time again.
I love
The
it.
previous company that I worked for, I was with them for over a decade. I was the third employee and with them all the way through. It was almost 11 years that I was with them. I started as their director of IT. By the time I left, I was their vice president of corporate operations and was leading IT, HR, safety, transportation, ESG, and the PMO. Everything except for accounting. Didn't want anything to do with that. But and it wasn't that the organization was toxic.
Mhm.
But what I saw was a gradual separation in terms of alignment of my values and the values of the organization that was occurring. Whenever I started, very entrepreneurial based, focused on team, culture, people, customers, all of those things. And then, as with many organizations, as scale occurs, the focus gradually tends to shift over to the numbers side of things. And I get it. That's part of business. I mean, businesses are in business to make money. I had gotten to a point to where the focus on the numbers was more than the people, and my heart and soul is aligned with the people and the teams and the culture. And as challenging as it was for me to step away, I found myself spending more time with sleepless nights,
Mhm.
restless nights, anxiety. I don't like where this is going. It just doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah.
It's not aligning with my heart anymore. And so we have to constantly audit ourselves, our
Mhm.
friends, peers,
Yeah.
colleagues in the company that we work for and ask, is this healthy for me?
Mm.
There is a delicate balance between stretching us out of our comfort zone to
Yeah.
grow in a
Yeah.
challenging environment and pulling ourselves to where we're on the verge of snapping
Mhm.
for a long period of time.
Yeah.
That's not healthy.
Yeah.
And so you have to ask yourself, is this healthy for me?
Mm. That's really
When
good.
you make the decision, this is not healthy for me, then starts the journey of what does the next season of my life look like?
Look like.
And be intentional about it. Do not let your emotions from a frustrating meeting with your toxic boss, overrun logic, and get yourself into a financial bind. You know what? I'm done. I quit. I'm out of here. And then all of a sudden you are scrambling to find
To
another
find it.
job.
Yeah.
When you make that decision, stick with it.
Yeah.
Indecision is an even bigger killer than dealing with a toxic boss. Make the decision, put a plan in place, and then act on it.
Hmm.
Network with people on LinkedIn, create content on LinkedIn, raise your level of awareness and lean into providing value. Become a creator
Yeah.
on the LinkedIn or social media platforms so that people have a tendency to want to come to you. And this
Mm.
is, one of the things that I love about you and this show that you're creating is you're doing this just because it's what you love. You want
Yeah.
to create value.
Yeah.
And what is going to happen on a long enough time horizon, you are going to open up more and more opportunities for
Mm.
yourself. It's not that you're ever going to act on it, but having that
Yeah.
opportunity out there, it's such a freeing feeling because you then know if at
Hmm.
some point you do have a bad experience with that toxic boss, you can stand your ground and feel
Right.
comfortable in knowing this is who I am, this is what I believe in.
Right.
And if you get let go, you've already created all of these opportunities out there. But it's all about making that decision and then sticking with it,
Hmm.
building a plan,
Right. Right.
and then moving forward down that path.
Right.
Don't look back and wonder
That's true.
if I should have changed my decision.
I love that. You have to take into account, is this healthy for me? And I think it's important that you don't just leave an organization and you quit the same day. Many I felt like doing that so many times. But I think individuals that are mature, they would create a plan. I think it's so important that you create plans for everything that you do, because you don't want to get in a moment where you're hot about something that your leader did or did not do, and then you just quit because your reputation is on the line. It doesn't matter. This is a small world, and you may live in Texas and I'm here in Tennessee, but guess what? The word will get out. Don't you know they left and slammed the door and they did this and they did that. It will get out there. So I think you have to protect your reputation, and you have to protect your health, and you have to protect your peace, and you have to create a plan to say, you know what what's going to be my goals for the next for this week, next week, and the next month, so I can move on. I think there's opportunities where we're going through these things and we have to learn from them, because you will encounter it again. So when you encounter it again, you want to be able to say, you know what did I learn from the last situation? And how can I be more effective in this situation? So Sean, thank you so much. I mean, this has been a great conversation that I believe a lot of employees, a lot of leaders are going to listen to this and say, you know what, let me take this into consideration and into thought. Are there any last minute tips or actionable advice that you want to share with our listeners today about dealing with a toxic leader, or an uneducated, or a leader that lacks self-awareness?
I think the biggest thing that has helped me in life and in my career has been to view things through a lens of
Hmm.
opportunity.
Mm,
Always ask yourself, what is this trying to teach me?
teach me. Yeah.
And there are times when you are going to beat your head against that wall
Hmm.
for months or years. That's kind of a
Yeah.
Night at the Roxbury callback. But you are going to feel like, oh my God, this is never going to end. But you have to ask, what is this trying to teach
Yeah.
me?
Yeah.
How can I learn from it? How can I grow from it? And then how can I use this as a stepping stone to
It's a
that
stepping
next
stone. Yeah.
stage of my life?
Yeah.
And when you start to view things through that lens, I'm telling you, your life is going to get better.
Yeah. Yeah. I really believe that. Just with me, for example, I did that. And it was able to show me how much more valuable I was. Right. So, for those of you that are listening and you may have a toxic boss, you may be going through some really difficult things at work. I want to share with you, protect your peace, protect your health, and look at as it as an opportunity to say, is this a stepping stone for me to move up and out of the organization, to find something that's going to realign with my goals, realign also with my purpose. So thank you so much, Sean. Before we get out of here, I always love doing this, sharing and encouraging Bible verse to encourage our listeners. Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. When I think about this scripture, you have to remember that God, he loves you and he will not put anything on you that you cannot bear. If you cannot go through it, he won't put it on you. So if you're going through situations in your life, in your career, just know that all things will work together for your good. You just got to trust him. You got to believe him.
I think it's beautiful. Just absolutely nailed it and aligns with what we've been talking about. View things through this lens of optimism and opportunity, and know that life is doing these things for you, not to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining today. I want to make sure that we continue to, talk about these topics that are going to help you in your everyday career, everyday life. Sean, before we get out here, do you want to share your podcast and your social sites just so our listeners can follow you on your leadership journey?
Absolutely. So I started my podcast about 3.5 years ago. It's called The Way of the Wolf and focuses on leadership and business and teams and things like that. So you can just Google The Way of the Wolf podcast, go to YouTube or any of your audio podcast platforms. We're kind of all over the place. I'm most active on LinkedIn. So you can just find me, Sean Barnes, on LinkedIn, or you can go to seanbarnes.com. thewayofthewolf.com, kind of a lot of different ways to access me. I love having these types of conversations. So check out the show. If you like what you see or hear, just shoot me a message and let's chop it up.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening today to the Transparent HR podcast. And we're going to continue to have these episodes every other week. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, send us questions that you may have. Send us a text. And we would love to have some of these conversations and questions that you have on the show. See you next time.